So, yeah, thank you all for being here, and not for being at the really interesting talk about Karl Marx that's down there right now. I was there earlier accidentally because they told me it was talk and play. So, yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm going to talk about developing with constraints, which is kind of an excuse to talk about Bitsy, but I'm also going to talk about more than just Bitsy. And yeah, how it started with was there are some tools out there you can use to make video games. There are tools that can be used to make video games which are way worse, that are way more limiting than other tools for no real apparent reason. Because why would you use a tool that makes video games that maybe perform slower, that gives you less possibilities, that look more restricted, that you can make the exact same games with other tools that are more performant, that look prettier or look the same, and yeah, there's so much more possibility out there. So why would we use the tools that have those constraints? Some examples I have for these tools are the arduboy, which is a little console. It looks like this, it's tiny. It's Arduino based, which just means there's a tiny microcontroller in there that is not very powerful. And yeah, you can make video games on it. There's Pico8, which is also a console, but it's a console that doesn't exist. It's a console that's only virtual, and you can execute it on your PC. You can make video games on it, but there's no hardware equivalent to it. So this means it has limitations that are way, way more limiting than the limitations of the PC it runs on. But yeah, it's here. And there's the Bitsy, which is also a tool for making games. It's only an HTML editor, and you can not code with it. You can only make super limiting experiences like that. And if you know how a Bitsy game looks like, you will recognize a Bitsy game most of the time. So yeah, the arduboy has 128 times 64 pixels, 2 colors, black and white. You can program it with C, with the Arduino IDE, and yeah, it has 23 kilobyte of flash, 2.5 kilobyte of RAM. That's less than the original Game Boy. So if you want retro, that's basically modern retro, if that's a thing. Yeah, in sound, there's no real sound that sounds good in this. There's only square wave generators and 2 of them. So making stuff sound good on this is really hard. And even then it has a certain distinct quality about it that you'll recognize. Pico8. Like I said, it's a console that doesn't exist. It's a fantasy console. One interesting thing I encountered when playing with Pico8 is that it counts your tokens. A token is nothing that really exists when programming with other stuff. But when you code, it counts how many words you write. Like a number is a token, no matter how long the number is. A function is a token. Basically, every word is a token in Pico8. So what's really great about tokens is that you can just count tokens. I know if I write 3 more words in there in my program, I know that's 3 more tokens. I don't really know how much 3 more words are in when I program for the arduboy. It might be that just 3 words include a huge thing in the background, and yeah, take away 10 kilobyte, which is huge with those constraints. Yeah, inputs are also fairly limited. Also, sound is really interesting because you can't include just MP3 sounds like you can with other tools. You have to edit the waveforms yourself. Really interesting. Bitsy is, again, even more limiting. You can't program with it. You can't do any sounds with it. And yeah, it has 3 colors. It is 2 colors per tile. It's tile-based. You can see here it's all this tiny 8x8 squares that it's made of. It has 4 buttons. Yeah, this is it. I asked Twitter, hey, why would you use those super limiting tools? And I got a few different answers. Most of them were along the lines of, I like how limiting it is. I like how it boxes me into a certain corner. So in this corner, this is a possibility to know this corner, to know what is possible and then act on it. Because with more powerful tools, the problem often is that I can do everything. And if I can do everything and ask myself, what should I do first? The answer is also everything. So you can't, it's really hard to choose. So yeah, some reasons of why would you do this is the clarity of the design. You know everything that's possible. I've seen several people ask, how do you draw a straight line in Unity? And it's not as simple as you might think, because you could either construct a mesh and then render that to the screen, and then you already have to worry about, how do I construct this mesh? When do I draw the mesh? What material, what shaders do I use for this mesh? And that's all stuff you don't want to worry about with your first prototype, with your tiny game you scramble together in a few hours. So yeah, with those more limited tools, it's clear. I draw a line in Pico8 by saying line, xy of the start position, xy of the end position, put in my closing brackets, and I have a line. Yeah, those technical limitations are also super clear. I know how much I have allocated in my RAM. Even in arduboy, which is the most complex of the examples I gave here, it's clear I have those things, and those things give me my problems right now. So yeah, with more complex tools, with Unity, for example, it's often, okay, I have this much FPS, and those FPS drops are everywhere. I have to worry about every little thing, how much performance it pulls. And this also makes developing the game way more taxing, way more difficult, because, yeah, you have to worry about everything. And by having everything so limited, it's freeing because you know what the limits are. You don't have to worry about everything. And yeah, it's also super useful for the scope, because you know how big your game is allowed to be. If your game becomes your game can't get any bigger than a certain limit, because the console, your environment, your tool simply doesn't allow you to make it bigger. So that also helps you constrain yourself. Also, a thing that was named multiple times was the community. There's a really nice small communities around those tools. And those communities are really together because they have the same goal of using this little thing to make neat things, to help each other. What I also think is really helpful is that because those tools are so tiny, so self-sufficient, is that if you have a tip of how to do a thing in those tools, this tip is useful to almost everyone who uses the tool. If I have a tip and I tell you in Unity how to make shaders do multipasses easier, most of you won't care, because you can just download shaders or use the standard shaders. Like, there's so much stuff that happens in parallel that the community also happens in parallel and gets split up a lot. And because those tools are so tiny, the community has more of a sense of togetherness, of working together with the same thing. And yeah, it feels homey. Also, one thing is the personality of the tools. If you see a Pico8 game, you know it's Pico8, because it has those limitations. It has the 16 Pico8 colors you can't deviate from. if you see a Bitsy game, you know it's a Bitsy game because it has those 8x8 pixel tiles. It has those 3 colors per screen. And this also is a thing that really helps people of feeling like this is a thing I'm a part of. This is what I like. Also, one thing with the personality of those things is also the retro nostalgia charm of being like, hey, this is similar to the olden times of the pioneers of video games.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Would you say it's easier to develop a game for Bitsy or Pico8 than for Unity? Like if you want to start developing, is it better to start in something like Unity or something like Pico8?
I think it's definitely better to start in Pico8 because, like, I think it's perfect to start in Bitsy because Bitsy doesn't allow you to program. It doesn't allow you to deviate from making your first game, getting a character in there, making it move, making it interact with stuff. But it also doesn't allow you to rest there. So as soon as you're like, okay, what if I have 2 characters that work together? What if I want a character that follows me? That's already something that's not possible in Bitsy. So we're already at a point where our hypothetical person playing with Bitsy is like, I want to do more, and then they can switch to something more powerful. I just played with Pico8 yesterday, so I don't have that much experience with it. But what really also stood out to me there was that it's really contained. You can have a cheat sheet of everything Pico8 can do, and then you know what Pico8 can do, and you can't look anywhere else for hidden features because there are none. There are not 3 different functions that basically do the same thing. And one thing I did is implement a mini library with a bunch of functions that do vector calculations. So I was forced to see, okay, how do I normalize a vector? How do I add a vector to another vector and stuff? How do I get the difference? And I think that's also a really good thing for beginners to have to think through what's happening internally. And then once they know this, once they made a bunch of game with Pico8, then when they switch to a more powerful tool, then they know, okay, hey, I just call .normalize here, but I know internally that it's calculating the length and dividing the whole vector by the length. So yeah, absolutely think those constrained environments are great for learning, because if you want to do one thing, there's one way to do it, and not 10 confusing different ways. So yeah, also talking about learning, thank you. By starting with those tools, it's a great way to then go to the more powerful tools. Like Bitsy is, I think, the most constraining tool I've met so far. There might be more constraining tools, but whatever. But from Bitsy, it's only a tiny step up to Twine. Twine is already a tool that's used by many people to be their main tool to make narrative games, to make games that rely on story, to make sometimes visual novels. But it's also really pinpoint. It's really clear what Twine can do and what Twine can't do. So, and yeah, from there, it's the next step is ClickTeam Fusion, which is another tool. I don't know if you can program in ClickTeam Fusion. You might be able, but you can definitely create games without programming. So that's another tiny step up from there. And that's a full-fledged tool you can make games with. And then the next tiny step up is GameMaker, which is, yeah, you probably most of you know GameMaker games. Some really successful games have been made with GameMaker. And then you can use Unity, Unreal, whatever, the bigger engines that are basically the default by today. And yeah, one answer I also got for my question, which I asked on Twitter, was that they really like Pico8 and basically learned programming in Pico8, do a lot of stuff in Pico8, but now are switching to JavaScript, but they're kind of keeping the constraints that Pico8 gave them. So Pico8 not only taught them how to make games, it also taught them how to constrain themselves, how to pinpoint where they want to go, how to make games efficiently. So yeah, I mentioned a bunch of tools. If you would now say, hey, what's the right tool for me? I want to make games that are charming and little and with constraining engines. I wrote a bunch of stuff down here. My favorite, Bitsy, try it out. I made a bunch of games with Bitsy. None of them took longer than 3 hours. So if you have little time, if you have little experience, if you want something small, Bitsy is amazing. Twine, if you want something text-based, if you don't want something tiny running around, if you want text, if you want to tell stories that branch, Twine is great. Touch Twine, it's also without any programming and really lovely. Pico8, I talked about Pico8. It's super lovely. It's a bit more programmery. You can make cool programming stuff with it. It has neat with Pico8 is that just like Bitsy, it also has integrated tools for creating graphics. So when you use arduboy or if you use most tools, also Unity, GameMaker, whatever, for most of them you have to generate your assets, your 3D models, your sprites outside of the tool and then import it. Or also even your sounds. Pico8 has all of that integrated into itself. So yeah, if you ask yourself, hey, how do I make something look good? How do I generate a sprite in Pico8? The tools are right there. You don't have to worry about anything outside of Pico8. So yeah, cool thing. Really cute, really small. If you have some experience with code and want something really tiny you can put in your hand and carry with you, arduboy is your thing. But yeah, arduboy uses C and libraries and pointers and stuff, so I'm not sure how great arduboy is for beginners. If you say, I want to use Pico8, but I don't want to pay 15 euro for it, Lexful deserves your money if you can pay 15 euros for it by Pico8. But you'll also find there are alternatives. There's TIC80 and Lyco12. I think TIC80, I'm not sure what it uses. Lyco12 uses Lua, just like Pico8, but it uses the love. It's love, but written with an Ö, it's weird. Graphics engine in the background has different libraries. Very similar to Pico8, but open source. And yeah, if you say, hey, this is all really cool, but it's also all super 2D, I want to get 3D stuff. That's Voxatron. Voxatron is developed by the same guy who is doing Pico8. So yeah, you can have 3D voxels, 3D graphics with a super limited clear tool. So yeah, at the end of the talk, I also want to show you Bitsy and how easy it is. When you open Bitsy for the first time, it looks like this. You can click play and then move. That's it. And the next step is you can go to tiles. Tiles is just the stuff you build your game with. Plus makes a new one. And then make this thing. I have no clue what it is. You can even do animations in Bitsy. There are 2 frames. So we can do this. So, and now we can place it in the world, and we have stuff that animates. And now we say, okay, this is nice, but if we press play, we just walk through it. We click the wall button, and it's a wall. This is your first game. You can just walk against it, and it collides. I told you about the 3 color rule. The colors are right here. It's a background color. It's a background. Sprite tile color, which is all of the tiles. Also, the sprite color applies to the player, the sprites, and the items. There are items. Nope. Okay, let me click. I have to stop it. So here, there are icons. I can place them. Let me. I am confused by computers. Okay, yeah. Items, sprites, you can make them interact. There's a dialogue. This one says I'm a cat. And items you can collect, which also displays a text when you collect it, but afterwards it's gone. So, an example. This one says I'm a cat, and you can talk to it multiple times. And this one says you found a nice warm cup of tea, and it's gone afterwards. So yeah, super limiting, that's it. That's all you can do with it. But yeah, if you play with it for a while, you can do really cool, really interesting stuff with it, really lovely stuff, so please do. Thank you.
Gibt es Fragen?
I have a question. Are you familiar with the game Baba Is You?
Yes.
Would you think it's possible to do it in Pico8, for example? It's a very gameplay-heavy game.
Absolutely.
Very small. And
absolutely.
Should work probably.
Yeah. Baba Is You is absolutely possible in Pico8. It won't look exactly the same because, like I mentioned, there's a. Hi, here. Those are the 16 colors you have.
Yeah.
Here. Yeah. But yeah, the gameplay is absolutely possible in Pico8.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking that these. In this kind of environment, you're kind of reliant on gameplay to deliver a good experience or to deliver something special, and that's the kind of constraints, breeding, creativity thing that I find appealing about this approach.
You might have heard of the little game Celeste.
I don't think I've internet.
I don't. But yeah, Celeste, the new version, is done I think in C# and SDL. But the first version of Celeste was done in Pico8.
Okay.
There's a Celeste prototype in Pico8. And yeah, it works great.
Yeah.
So, also there's a game in development right now called Slipways, and there's also a prototype in Pico8.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you show us Pico8?
I can show you Pico8, thank you for asking. Actually, I have it open right now. This is Pico8. Big pixels. Yeah. Right at the beginning, it looks like this. And yeah, it's basically like a command line interface. It's like this. And then there's some, okay, with help, you can see everything you can do. It's a little bit daunting at first, because like, oh my gosh, that's command line interface, and what do I do? But the important stuff is ls. You can use to see the stuff in the folder you're in right now, and cd, which you can use to to move between the folders. Yeah, and then you can load stuff. Or one important thing is, if you press escape, you go to the editor. So yeah, this is the editor. This is the code editor where you can write code. The code is Lua, so you can write comments like this and stuff like this. Here's tabs to manage your code. And there's the sprite editor you can use to make sprites in all of the colors. Here's the... Oh, here, that's the map editor. You can make maps right in Pico8 without worrying about that much stuff. This is the wave generator, which you can use to make sounds. I didn't have a headset at work yesterday, so I didn't try that yet. But yeah, there's some really great music online done with this. Of course, it all sounds really retro, really old-timey, but I think it's really cool because you see what the sound is made of. You can basically touch it on a really base level. And this is how you make music. I don't know enough about music to do this. There's a sound. So yeah, what I did yesterday was here. This is the code I wrote. This is the mini vector. I don't know how to scroll in here. So, this is the mini vector thingy I wrote. It's all not that complicated. I wrote it over the course of a few hours, understanding everything. Like here, button 0 is left, button 1 is right, 2 is up, 3 is down, and you just say button and it returns the thing. Those are the tiny sprites I did. And yeah, all of this results in this. And yeah, this was super easy to do. Okay, it wasn't super easy because I had to learn how to use Pico8 from scratch. But yeah, now I know how to do this. And yeah, I aborted it, so yeah, Control L resets the screen so you can see everything again. And by pressing escape, I'm back in the editor. And yeah, that's it. Just code stuff, but not a lot of it, not as much as in other tools. If you hate coding, stay away from Pico8. But yeah. Also, like I mentioned, this is the cheat sheet. It might look daunting at first. I'm sorry for this. Coding is always a big jump in the water for the first time, but yeah, that's everything. After you know this, you're done with it.